first question goes, Dear Ajahn, thank you for another year of teaching, retreats, visiting teachers, Dhamma books, Dhamma quotes, etc. We feel truly blessed to be part of the community. Thank you for bringing a well-preserved tradition of practice out of the Thai forest into the world. Anumodana to all Sangha at the monastery.
I'm happy that the teachings are useful to you. Keep up your practice. That's the best Christmas gift you can give to yourself. Keep practicing.
Sadhu. Next question. Dear Ajahn, I have a question regarding the Buddha relics. Who collected them and how could they be so well preserved? Can you please talk to us more about the history of the relics? Thank you.
Well, obviously the Buddha passed away a long time ago now, but we do have some records from the Tripitaka itself, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, and then also the commentaries that have been handed down to us. So the general kind of story is that when the Buddha passed away, he was eventually cremated, but they first had to wait for Mahakassapa, who wasn't considered the leader of the Sangha, but he was a very important elder that everybody respected and felt should be there at the cremation of the Buddha. So they were waiting. But before Mahakassapa had arrived, he was walking from a long way away, because he like most monks, he'd walk around India in those days. While they were waiting, they actually tried to set fire to the cremation pyre and it wouldn't burn. The belief is that the Devas were just holding everything up until Mahakassapa arrived. So as a kind of psychic feat, the fire didn't work. And I've actually attended some cremations, open cremations done on a log fire where the fire didn't light. So I can believe it could have happened. Eventually Mahakassapa arrived, the cremation was held, and afterwards, you let the fire cool off, and then you collect the ashes. And as the same with arahants, and even up to this current day, in present day, you collect the ashes, and often there are little fragments of bones in the ashes, and sometimes already those bones have turned to crystal. They look like relics. Sometimes they just look like little fragments of cremated bone. Depends. A few years ago, Lumpur Bunyarit, who used to live in Adelaide in Australia, and he was a forest monk, very well known in Thailand. They cremated his body and they collected the ashes the next morning, and his heart hadn't burnt, and so his heart became a kind of relic. This large heart was sitting in a mound of ash. It was a very unusual thing, because you would have thought it would have burnt up, but it didn't. It stayed kind of intact. It was charred, but it was there. And there are these kind of stories even right up to the modern era of body parts being kind of left only partially burned, or even crystallizing during the cremation process. And when the ashes are collected and the parts of the bones are collected, there are even little crystals there. So anyway, the Buddha's bones were collected from the ashes left after the cremation. And they were worried, everyone was worried there's going to be a big fight, because there are about 8 main kingdoms in those days who had faith in the Buddha, and all these kings wanted their share of the Buddha's bones. Seems to be like that. The same with arahants. Everyone wants to get their piece if you can't have enlightenment, well, the next best thing is have some bones from an enlightened teacher. So each king is a king, and kings tend to feel they're very important. So they all felt they deserved to have some of the bones. So what do you do? So there was a Brahmin called Dona the Brahmin, and he took charge of dividing up the relics into 8 portions. But as I mentioned earlier, he also felt he was entitled to one of the relics, so he put one of the teeth of the Buddha in his top knot. Brahmins have a top knot on their hair, they have long hair. But then, if I remember the story right, Indra came along and pinched it. He said, well, he's pinched it already, I can pinch it from him. So Indra pinched it from the top knot and took it up to heaven. That's why one of the Buddha's teeth is in heaven. But anyway, the main bulk of the Buddha's relics, body parts, were divided to these 8 kingdoms and then separated and went around India, and then various shrines, monuments, chedis were built to house them. And that's how it all began. And Buddhists have great faith in the relics of Buddhas and enlightened teachers. And as I said, everyone wants a part because they're inspiring. People find the energy is good. Sometimes people see the radiance from the relics. They see the aura, or they feel the energy. Even the devas want them. And devas will tend to look after relics, and so they'll kind of preserve them in a place. If they've been put in a chedi, then they'll stay there and protect them. This seems to be how it goes. And so over the years, the relics have gradually spread around India and then out to Buddhist countries, because it tends to be Buddhist people who have faith in the Buddha and the Arahants. So they're the ones who will look after the relics. And sometimes, cultures change over time. Maybe the Buddhist teachings disappear from a country and another religion takes over, or the political system changes and people no longer practice Buddhism. So often relics move in mysterious ways. Sometimes physically people will save relics or retrieve them from a chedi, from a place where the people no longer practice Buddhism, and they'll take them away to another area, another country where people do practice Buddhism and have faith. Or sometimes it seems to happen mysteriously. The devas seem to take them from a chedi where nobody is practicing anymore and put them in a place where people do practice. And again, that seems to be happening even up until the present day. There are those monks and lay people who have experienced Buddha relics manifesting. And we say, well, the devas are bringing them. And sometimes they take them away again as well. But that's how they seem to move around. Sometimes people pass them to each other, give them or offer them. Sometimes the devas do it. And so they've spread around the Buddhist world over the centuries. And there always seem to be, lots of relics everywhere. So probably what happens is maybe they also are multiplying them. Again, one of those sort of psychic phenomena that's hard to explain scientifically, but they seem to sometimes maybe multiply in number. So there's a part to relics that maybe is difficult to explain. But some things are not difficult to explain, just people having faith in the Buddha and then seeing the relics of the Buddha as symbolic, as important reminders of who the Buddha was. That's fairly obvious. And then people feeling very peaceful, very happy, having lots of faith in the presence of relics. Well, that seems to be fairly straightforward as well.
Sadhu. Another question. Dear Ajahn, may I ask if it is appropriate for one who is in middle age to pre-plan for their own funeral? Is it too early? Will it be beneficial for oneself? What would be some considerations in pre-planning one's funeral?
No, I think that's a very good idea. Better to plan ahead, because it gives you time mentally to adjust to the fact that you will die. Because it's one of the, most people are in denial. They don't want to talk about it, think about it. And that causes a lot of trouble for them personally as they get closer to the moment of death, because they haven't adjusted or prepared. And it also causes trouble for the family because they're not ready and they haven't discussed it. They don't know what to do. What did mum and dad want for the funeral? What do they want done afterwards? There's often a lot of doubt, sometimes squabbles and arguments. So I would say it's a good idea to plan early. The Buddhist reflection really is that the physical body, which stops working when you die, is just a collection of elements, physical elements, earth, air, fire, water. It's not a self, it's anatta. You can afford to let go of it when you die, because a lot of people believe, well, they shouldn't let go of their body, or they don't want to, or they cling on to their body. Mentally they cling on. But you can let go of your body, that's okay. So whether you're buried or cremated, in the end, it doesn't matter so much, does it? Because your body is gone from you. You no longer own this body once you die. So funerals are often more about the living, who's left, family, friends. And if one gives some instructions, that may help them to do it properly, because they probably want, ideally, they want to do it properly, with the right attitude, with respect, love, appreciation of the one who's died. So if that's you, if you give some instructions, that helps them to do it properly and feel they've done the right thing by you after you died. So you can leave some kind of a will or instructions. Because the alternative is maybe they're floundering when you've died, they don't know what to do, and that's a lot of stress, and it can lead to disharmony, bad feeling in the family, or just unhappiness. So perhaps some instructions would help them. You have children, you have friends, relatives, maybe to help them. And also, bearing in mind that the body is just a body. Ultimately, it's not you, it's not yourself. Well, what can be done? So some people give their body to science. Even monks will do that. Some people, probably the most common kind of funeral for Buddhists is cremation. So it's just, cremating. All that's left after that is some ashes, which you may want to scatter somewhere, or sometimes they're stored somewhere. But again, think of your future generations, your kids, your grandkids. Try not to burden them with a lot of maintenance costs and duties to look after a shrine to you, or a grave or whatever. I'm not saying you shouldn't have that, but just try and do it sensitively and in a way that's practical, helpful to the future generations, if you are hoping to have your ashes put somewhere. Or similarly, if you are buried, then you have a grave. What kind of grave do you want? Or is it one where you're asking people to come and look after it every year and do this and do that for you until they don't know why they're doing that? Future generations won't know you. So, these are considerations. It's your choice, obviously, but now they have eco-funerals where you're buried in a forest and they just let you decompose and disappear and nobody comes back. They may know the tree that you're buried under, but they don't have to look after a grave for generations and generations. Because as I said, ultimately your body is just 4 elements. More important is your mind. So you personally want to prepare for your death by making your mind peaceful, wholesome, focusing on the wholesome qualities of the mind, ideally learning to meditate so you can keep your mind calm and peaceful right up to the moment of death. Best of all would become enlightened before you die, but if you haven't become enlightened, at least keep your mind peaceful and calm. Accept that you have to let go of your body. Accept that death is inevitable. So you personally want to prepare for your death, with your mind, prepare your mind for it. And then you want to help out your family members, the surviving family members, by giving them some instructions maybe. So you have a number of options. That's up to you, what you feel is appropriate.
Saru Lumpur. Next question. Dear Lumpur, thank you for the reflections over the years, much appreciated. Could you please tell us the difference between mano, chitta and vinya? Or are they the same but taking different forms? Thank you.
Well, I think practically speaking, they're the same thing, really. The citta, we usually translate as the mind. Sometimes people call it the heart, or sometimes heart/mind. But when they say heart, they mean the mental heart, psychological heart, as opposed to the physical heart. Ajahn Chah would say, it's that which knows. That which knows, this quality of knowing. So a human being has the physical part, and then they have the mental part. The Buddha divided all of this into the 5 khandhas. So, rupa is the physical khandha of the body, physical body, made up of 4 elements. The mental part is made up of feelings, perceptions, thought formations or intention, and then sense consciousness, vijnana. So they're different. These are the different functions of the mind, or activities of the mind, or contents of the mind. The mind is more the umbrella term for that which knows. So whether you're feeling happy or sad, your mind knows that. Of course, the mind can know wrongly because we're affected by greed, anger, delusion, wrong views. The mind might misunderstand things and know things all wrong regularly. That's why we experience suffering in the mind. But the mind itself is just this kind of pure quality of knowing. It's just a natural thing. Just like physical elements are just natural, there's earth, water, air. The mind is like a natural element that just is, this quality of knowing. But because of delusion, we take hold of it. A sense of self, sense of ownership arises from delusion, from ignorance. The Arahant doesn't do that anymore. They've eradicated ignorance from their citta. It's no longer conditioning the citta. So they still have a citta, a mind, but the sense of self and ownership has gone. You might say that's the fruits of the path, the practice of Buddhism. So they still have a mind, it's just they're not attached to it with a sense of self.
Another question. Thank you, Lumpur, for bringing up the topic of relics. Has Lumpur seen relics of the Buddha or highly realized beings such as Ajahn Chah? I have seen the relics of 2 past abbots of Kopan Monastery. They were crystal-like relics. Has Lumpur any explanation of these crystal-like relics other than the bones or teeth which have not burned to ashes?
Well, yes, they say from an enlightened mind you get a lot of very pure energy while the person is alive. And as their body is cremated, some of that energy is left. It leaves an imprint while they're alive. Their pure, peaceful mind is constantly cleansing or purifying the physical elements of the body. Some of that is left when they're cremated, and so if there are little pieces of bone, usually it's bone, but not just bone, it can be blood or other aspects of the body. They can be impregnated, you might say, or purified by the pure mind of the Arahant. So then they sometimes crystallize. Not always. Sometimes they just stay as little pieces of bone. But there's a whole culture around relics, and so there are those experts who can see the different parts of the body in the relic. There's different colors, and sometimes relics change color over time. Sometimes body parts change over time, so they may begin just looking very ordinary, like ordinary little pieces of bone that you would find in the ashes of anyone who's been cremated, but over time they crystallize, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. Ajahn Chah, I've kept his hair over the years, and many of my friends who helped to look after Ajahn Chah kept his hair. Sometimes his hair turns to crystal, little crystals forming in the hair. Sometimes the hair keeps growing. So, short hair, a monk has short hair when you shave it, but sometimes Ajahn Chah's hair keeps growing, so you end up with these long hairs. Very kind of unusual. When they first made a waxworks model of Luang Por Chah many years ago, the Thais are so good at this, making these waxworks models, that they take real hair and with tweezers very painstakingly press it into the head of the waxworks model. So Ajahn Chah's waxworks model had his real hair in it, and it kept growing. And this has happened with a few teachers, the hair keeps growing. They say from the pure energy of the mind, somehow it just means the hair keeps growing. Hair is crystallized, other parts of the body crystallize. So it's a purification process of the mind affecting the body. Teeth, as we say, teeth have crystallized. Something we don't talk about very much, but it's true. When Ajahn Chah passed away, just before we cremated him, we were at his hospital kuti where I used to look after him, and we got permission from the Sangha to dig up his toilet pit. And it hadn't been used for a year because he passed away and his body was kept for a year, but just before he was cremated, so that's a year after he passed away, we dug up the pit. So it's just sandy soil, wasn't smelly at all. And we took it in sacks back to Luang Por Anand's monastery, and we laid it out on the forecourt around the meditation hall in the sun for many days. And many monks painstakingly used filters to filter the earth and the sand out until all that was left were just thousands of little relics of Luang Por Chah. That was from the food that he ate and passed through his body. Even that became relics. And I still have some today. And one way that you kind of notice something being a relic, it's not absolute proof or guarantee, but relics will tend to float on water. So they have these bathing ceremonies where you place the relics of the Buddha or Ajahn Chah or any other enlightened being on water, and they tend not to sink, they'll float. And they even move together with a kind of magnetic energy, they move together. So that behind me where I'm sitting now, there's a Buddha statue. You can't see it. You can see the white Buddha behind my head, but there's a big bronze Buddha covered in gold leaf behind me, a standing Buddha. And in the head of that, there's many, many relics. So when we had an installation ceremony with Luang Por Anand to put those relics into the head of this Buddha, which is about 16 years ago, the day before the relics were installed, there was an earthquake here. We don't get earthquakes very often. That was unusual, to get an earthquake, and everyone thought, maybe that's because the relics are going to be installed in the Buddha's head. And we also had a ceremony bathing the relics, and we had hundreds of relics, large and small, different colours, different sizes. We placed them in water. Luang Por Anand mainly placed them. All these relics move together, hundreds of relics. They move together to join together. on the surface of the water, and they started to move in a clockwise direction, which is unusual again. The water was still, there's no movement, there wasn't an earthquake when we were doing this. And the water's still, and yet the relics were still moving around in a kind of procession, making a circle in the water. On the surface of the water, all these relics moved around together, which, is an unusual phenomenon. If there'd been sand or some other material, they'd just sink, wouldn't they? But they didn't. They floated, and they moved together, joined together. So relics can be bathed, they tend to float. Those with certain meditative powers, psychic powers, often see the aura coming from relics. A bright, radiant aura. So if it's Buddha relics, often it's a rainbow aura, because that was the aura that existed from the Buddha's mind. The Buddha's parami are perfected, so he has a rainbow aura. Other relics may be one particular colour, just the whiteness of the aura, or the gold aura of an arahant, maybe. So they can be individual colours, the auras around relics, or sometimes a rainbow aura around a Buddha. So there's different aspects to relics. Sometimes relics, as I said, appear immediately after a cremation. Sometimes it's longer, after many, many years. Sometimes the whole body is preserved, like some bodies like Kruba Chayawongsa, who was a disciple of Kruba Siwichai in northern Thailand. The Thais will know these names. He was considered to be a bodhisattva. They kept his body in a glass case. And I once went to pay respects to it, and his whole body turned to crystal. Not just a few relics, his whole body turned to crystal. It crystallized over time. So the effects of jhana, the effects of pure mind can come out in this way, in the physical form of the body, and particularly in relics.
Sadhu Luang Por. Another question on relics. Can we invite a relic to come to us?
Yeah, you can try. Depends whether the devas trust you or not. Maybe they'll look at you and say, oh, this guy just wants to do it for the wrong reasons. If you have the wrong intention, it's not good, is it? If you just want to do it to show off to your friends or something, not a good reason. If you have genuine faith in the Buddha, well, yes, make an adhitthana in your meditation, and if you do it often enough with a strong state of mind, maybe one day someone will give you some relics, or even they may manifest on your shrine. It does happen. But your mind has to have real faith, and you have to be a trustworthy recipient for the relics. Otherwise the devas are not going to risk it, are they? They're going to keep them where they're safe. We don't want the relics to be misused or not respected. So there you go.
Sadhu. Next question. Dear Ajahn, is it known as to what happened to the relic in Kandahar? Thank you.
As I said, that's the tooth relic that currently is normally in Beijing, came from Kandahar along the Silk Road. And we imagine many relics were taken from Kandahar, because Kandahar gradually faded as a Buddhist kingdom. Other cultural groups came in. So people would have taken the relics with them as they took the Tripitaka, as they took Buddhist artifacts, and they made Buddhist monasteries all along the Silk Road into China. So relics would have gone into China, Tibet maybe as well. They'd be taken and preserved elsewhere in Buddhist countries. As happens when in the modern era, they say many relics came from Laos into Thailand during the communist wars, because chedis were being destroyed and people were not being able to practice Buddhism. So many of the relics came into Thailand. So It's just how, over time, conditions change, societies, cultures change.
Sadhu Lumpu. Another question. Dear Ajahn, I'm trying to understand dependent origination in practical terms. When mind has delusion present, we make karma, and how should we understand the mind split into two, for example, rupa and nama, to create sense doors?
Well, the mind doesn't split into two with rupa and nama. Rupa is rupa. Rupa is form, physical form. So earth, air, fire, water. Nama is, like we were saying just now, citta, mind, that which knows. And they work together, but they're not the same thing. So a human being, the mind is not, ultimately is not dependent on the body. So when your body dies, the mind doesn't die. Unless you reach Nibbana, you'll go on to another life, another birth. If the mind was the body, then death would mean the death of the mind as well, wouldn't it? So the mind depends on the body. You might say the mind wants a body so that it can function and do things and, like you say, use the sense doors to see, hear, taste, smell, touch. And that's one of our big problems. We're attached to the objects of the senses. It's the mind or consciousness that knows these objects, and then it can experience pleasure or displeasure, pleasure or pain, through the sense doors as causes. But they're not the same thing, are they? The body that provides the sense doors, or the eyes are a physical thing. The ears are a physical thing. The sound that the ear hears is a physical thing. The sight that the eye sees is a physical thing. But the consciousness that arises is the mental thing, and they're separate. And so it's quite possible, you can be born in a Brahma realm if you train your mind well enough, of course. You've got to do the meditation. You could be reborn as a Rupa Brahma, so you don't even have a body. Just have the mental factors, no body in that realm, in that birth. So the main problem is the delusion of self, like you say. Paticca Samuppada is helping us to see that, how we create this sense of self and make karma, good and bad, because we have a sense of self. We're coming to see through the practice of Buddhism, to see through that delusion that there is no self. And then the mind lets go, and even lets go of its attachment to the body, because the body is not really you. When you really know that, the mind will let go. So they call it a process of awakening. So when we're deluded, it's as if the mind is asleep, doesn't get it, doesn't know the truth, doesn't see the truth, is defiled. The process of the practice is like a process of waking up to the truth, or awakening. So the Buddha and the Arahants are fully awakened. So they have no more attachment to the body as self. They have a body while they're alive, but they don't attach to it as self.
Sadhu. Next question. Dear Ajahn, if we go to China, can we see the Buddha relic from Kandahar?
Oh, don't go to China, go to Thailand. You can see it every day at the moment. If you go to China, you only get once a year. Not so good. Very hard to see the Buddha relic or get close to it in China. They're very strict on how they look after it, and they just open up, I believe, once a year. If you're in Thailand, you can go and see it every day for the next 2 months. So go and see it in Thailand, much easier.
Sadhu. Are there any other questions?
Well, it's probably enough for tonight. Very nice to talk to you, and we wish you well in your practice. If you get a chance, maybe to go to Thailand to see this current exhibition of the Buddha's tooth relic, or you can go to India, see Buddha relics, or China later, or Sri Lanka, go and see the tooth relic in Kandy. If you get the chance, why not go on a holiday, a Buddhist holiday, pilgrimage holiday to one of these places. Anyway, for tonight, we'll leave it there and wish you all well in your practice.